Hello everyone, I'm Bethlehem Atfield. Welcome to the podcast Journey to Ethiopia with Story. Today's story will not only take you on a journey to Ethiopia, but also on a time travel to Tewodros' medieval kingdom. Whenever I watch British period dramas, I dream of the day that dramas about Ethiopian medieval kingdom are watched around the world. Well, I hope this dream of mine gets into the right ears and inspire film producers to take this challenge. In the meantime, there is no reason why stories like these couldn't be made into dramatized radio programs. If you are interested in collaborating as a volunteer for such projects, please contact me on journeytoethiopia4@gmail.com. Set free, Gondar, 1865. Zena was born 10 years earlier, just after Ras Kassa was crowned as Emperor Tewodros II of Ethiopia. Her father, Alega Mikhail, adored Tewodros for ending Zemene Mesafint, the era of nobles, and unifying Ethiopia. Her father was given the title Alega, chief, because he was the scribe of the patriarch of the Orthodox Church. He often put Emperor Tewodros' life in parallel with that of the King David of the Old Testament. Alega Mikhail used to say that Tewodros' origin, like David's, were not from the royal court, but humbler grounds. When as a child the monastery he was learning biblical studies was burned, the young Kassa lived off forest berries, like the young David did in the forest of Hareth. As a young man, Kassa was getting popular for ambushing the Oromo people and dividing their spoils among the small band that had become his followers, as David did with the Amalekites. When his reputation as fearless and unfailing in battle started to precede him, Empress Manen felt threatened and chose to pacify him by offering him to marry her granddaughter, the same way Saul offered his daughter Merab to David to be his wife. As many people in the country did not acknowledge Kassa's lineage to the Solomonic dynasty, he strategically took the throne name of Tewodros II. A cunning plan playing on the eagerness of the people to have the prophecy a man named Tewodros would restore the Ethiopian empire to greatness fulfilled. Once Emperor Tewodros strengthened his power, he told his followers to lay down their arms and return to their town of birth. Take up the tools of your former trade. The merchant will abide in his store, and the farmer in his field. Soldiers will be paid, and they will buy food from the peasants and no longer plunder farm stores. All the guns not in their hands will be smelted into plowshares and sickle blades. And in the markets across the land, the price of the plow ox will exceed that of the war horse. Seek the habits of peace, said the new emperor. Continue your old peacetime occupation, unless it was as a shifter, a rebel, in which case you'll have your hands and feet chopped off. Zena, who grew up hearing these glorious stories about Emperor Tewodros, truly believed he was a god sent to establish Ethiopia, which has been torn apart and ravished for many years under the leadership of the greedy nobles, the same way God sent Israel a king after the era of judges. Zena had a good friend in her next-door neighbor's son, Nuguse. Nuguse's father is the royal scribe. Unlike her, the 16-year-old Nuguse was allowed to accompany his father and assist him in the royal court. Nuguse had a soft spot for pretty little Zena, who was extremely intelligent and always craved for literary and political news of any kind. Although he had seen some strong ladies in the royal court, Zena seemed exceptional because of her earnest search for knowledge and truth. The ladies he had seen and heard of in the royal court, like the previous Empress Manen, were conceited and devious. Knowing that Zena was almost as informed as himself in the court matters, thanks to her secret reading of her father's scrolls and eavesdropping on her parents' conversations, he usually freely talked to her as an equal. In appreciation of this fact, she gave him the pet name Asabie, meaning one who considers me worthy. Zena was reading the Book of Enoch at the porch of their house. She seemed to have trouble concentrating. Her gaze involuntarily kept drifting to the valley below, which was filled with vibrant yellow mescal flowers. The next time she looked in that direction, she noticed a lone figure riding on a mule up on the small hilly path towards their house. As he got closer, from his erect, lean figure, she could tell it was the oldest son of their neighbor, Nuguse. When he got to the top of the hill, instead of going to the right where his house was, he turned left and went straight to the front gate of Zena's house. The slave boy who was splitting logwood by the gate reached for the mule as Nuguse headed towards Zena. She could see from the porch that Nuguse was frowning. After brief greetings, "Is your father home?" he asked briskly. "No, I'm afraid not." "Are you all right?" she asked with alarm. "Yes," he sighed, and sat on the bench beside her. There's an Arabic phrase that I hoped he would translate for me. Alec and Michael was fluent in 3 international languages, Arabic, Greek, and Latin, and spoke at least 5 local ethnic languages. "You can try me," Zena ventured. "I've been studying hard lately. My vocabulary is improving." She noticed that this piece of news seemed to have cheered him up a bit. "Let me get you some water to drink. You look tired," she offered before darting into the house. As he waited for Zena to return, Nuguse's gaze wandered to where the slave boy was taking a break under the oak tree. He remembered the day the boy was brought to Alec and Michael's house, a couple of years ago. Was it 1861? Yes, it must have been, he whispered to himself. At the time, he puzzled over why Alec and Michael would bother to buy a mere boy. He must have been around 10 years old then, but certainly looked younger because of his small stature and timid personality. The whole family has been kind to this boy and called him by his given name, Faisa, rather than by any derogatory term. They gave him only small chores to occupy him in the early days when he was homesick and refused to eat. Nuguse suspected that Alec and Michael bought him just to rescue him from a harsh slave master. Faisa watched Zena and Nuguse chatting before Zena rushed back into the house. He worried that Nuguse had come with bad news for his master. Once he adjusted to his new life, Faisa had begun to love and have great respect for Alec and Michael and his family, and would hate to see them in harm's way. "I'm almost content with my life here. If only the damned Mamete stops bothering me," Faisa thought. Mamete, the youngest daughter of Alec and Michael's beloved Utenat, witness, was a 3rd-generation slave in the family. At Alec and Michael's birth, his mother was too sick to breastfeed her newborn son, so Mamete's mother was asked to take over. Now, Mamete, who lost her mother the year before, wasn't anything like her mother. Where her mother was wise, gentle, and nurturing, Mamete was foolish, brash, and rebellious. She was the only unkind person to Faisa in this family. From the day he arrived in the household, she started calling him Shankala, a derogative term meaning a black slave. The term originated from a Nilotic ethnic group name in the southwest of Ethiopia. It never occurred to Mamete, who had a brown complexion, that she too was a black slave. Faisa avoided Mamete when he could and carried on with his house chores without being asked or supervised. Under his tender loving care, the garden transformed into an oasis. He had planted a bed of yellow, pink, red carnations elevated on a rock bed, which contrasts nicely with a circular bed of roses in the center of the trimmed lawn. He also expertly draped the bougainvillea vines along the fence, which bloom orange and pale pink flowers almost throughout the year. From where he was squatting under the oak tree, Faisa could see the koso, Hagenia, and flame trees flourishing with pink-red and deep flame-red flowers towering the skyline, giving him peace of mind. Another favorite task Faisa enjoyed was accompanying Alaga Mikhail to the market. This usually turned out to be quite an adventure, like the day he saw the first Ferengi, a white man. That day, Alaga Mikhail went to the Falasha, Ethiopian Jewish quarter, to get new horseshoes. Faisa, who was terrorized by witch doctors back in his southern village, was wary. He believed the superstitious believed that most craftspeople were Buddha, people in possession of evil eyes with malevolent supernatural power, afflicting those they envy or are attracted to. As they approached, they could overhear the conversation. The missionary was asking if the Falasha had heard the prophecy in the Torah about the coming of the Messiah, who would set all men free. Yes, I suppose he's our Emperor Tewodros, the one the prophets say he would come to restore our nation, the Falasha replied. On hearing this, Alaga Mikhail released one of his rare, booming laughs. Our emperor indeed fulfilled a prophecy when he ended the era of nobles and united the country, but the white man is talking about the prophecy in the good book, the one about the coming of the Christ, he said to the Falasha. The missionary stood up and bowed low to greet Alaga Mikhail. His greeting was returned with an equally humble bow from Alaga Mikhail. After they inquired about each other's health, Alaga Mikhail said, "You know the Falashas came here to settle well before the birth of Christ." "I know, Alaga Mikhail," the missionary said. "That's why I'm trying to tell him the good news." As Faisa processed this news, his stiffness left him, and he started to relax. If this Messiah has indeed come and set all men free, the Buddha must have been freed of evil eyes, so they can no longer possess me, he reasoned. The missionary had said all men, and he wondered if that included slaves like him. The door slammed behind Zena as she made her way back to the bench. The sound made Faisa shake himself out of his reverie, and he stood up to continue his chore. Zena brought a glass of water and beers and non-alcoholic mead. Nuguse contemplatively reached for the horn tumbler. After a sip of the beers, he seemed more relaxed. Zena then continued her usual probing. "So, what set our emperor into a fury yesterday?" How did you—" His voice trailed, remembering Zena's keen ears. Nobody had to tell her anything. She has a way of picking up snippets of information from the conversations of court officials and their wives, without them ever knowing about it. Nuguse, as the oldest son of the royal scribe, was allowed to accompany and assist his father. What she wanted was for him to paint a vivid picture of the scenes for her, and he knew it. Not only did he have a knack for painting detailed scenes of the settings and caught word for word what someone said, but even went further to try and philosophize about what must have been going in their minds. He also liked describing dramas of life, and he was talented at mimicking people, two things Zena most enjoyed. He had a faraway look as he leant against the wall and tried to describe what happened at the royal court the day before. His Majesty was sitting on a silk divan in the royal palace, Nuguse began. On the round polished oak table in front of him were the scrolls my father had asked me to put next to the leather-bound books stacked high. I was standing at the corner of the room, next to another table laden with more books, ready to offer any needed reference material. Behind the emperor was a tall window which offered a view of the palace compound, and beyond the walls I could see the layout of our beautiful town. His Majesty's eyes were looking tired and bloodshot. It seemed like he hadn't had a wink of sleep during the night. He turned his head to the door as it opened and the 4 European diplomats we were summoned to the meeting entered. Accompanying them were 5 white missionaries who wore our traditional clothes as usual. After bowing low and delivering their greetings, they sat in a semicircle on the rug at the Emperor's feet. Zena, you know how the reply to the letter that His Majesty wrote to the European king and queens went unanswered for a while? She nodded her head. Well, the letter was a request for their alliance to fight the Egyptians and Turks. The French diplomat had come to deliver the answer, but the reply was not from Napoleon. It was just from the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who advised His Majesty to regard how powerful those 2 forces were and cautioned His Majesty from a hazardous undertaking. Our Emperor had always put great faith in the Christian powers of Europe, so he was obviously disappointed. Over time, he has taken a personal dislike and mistrust to the British and French envoys. I heard him say once, "The Frenchman is insane." I wouldn't put it past him if he abandoned his garments and took to the streets. As for the Englishman, he is as dumb as an ass. Zena chortled and asked, "What do you think of them?" He's right. Behind their pale-colored beady eyes, their bodies seem to betray their fear and disgust for our Emperor. The missionaries understand and appreciate our culture and dig deeper to see the person behind the image of the fierce Emperor, but the diplomats seem completely pretentious. Well, the Emperor shouldn't be surprised, should he? He must be used to being surrounded by phony court officials by now, Zena gesticulated, throwing her arms wide and open and cocking her head to the side to punctuate her remark. Nuguse noticed how her wide almond eyes seemed even wider as she lifted her brows in eager anticipation for his approval. Nuguse was tempted to agree with her, but he knew Zena would value his deep insight more than his mere agreement. So he gently explained, "You don't understand, Zena. His Majesty had dreams of keeping our nation strong and introducing modernity. For this he never put his trust on his phony officials, but on the aid of modern powers of Europe. You see, he had just had his dream shattered." Zena nodded her head and nudged him to continue. "What happened next?" His Majesty snatched the letter out of the envoy's hands, his face contorted with anger as he shouted, "Napoleon may think that he is great, but I am greater still. His genealogy is only of yesterday. Mine I trace back to Solomon and David." It felt like the Emperor was possessed. The humble, good-humored, forgiving and generous Emperor you swore by is no longer there, Zena. I'm afraid the devil saw the rift that disillusionment has created in His Majesty's heart and took his cozy dwelling there. Zena shivered and covered her face. Nuguse instinctively put his arm on her delicate shoulders and softened his voice. "I'm sorry, dearest. I didn't mean to frighten you so." "I'm not frightened, Asabie. I'm just saddened." In retrospect, Zena thought she saw the Emperor's change coming. A year ago, she had heard her father quoting the Emperor's word about his people. "It is evident I have deceived myself. This is a stiff-necked people, and it is necessary to chastise them before they enjoy the blessings which Providence has intended for them." She had considered this a high-handed remark, and soon enough had heard of his harsh punishment of his subjects. The cutting off a hand, the flogging, and the putting to the sword all fell to do his will. Emperor Tewodros was extremely frustrated by his European allies' reluctance to help eliminate the threat of invading Turks. To add fuel to the fire, some of his own subjects were rebelling against his strict rule. A few weeks after Nugus's visit, on the 6th day of November, all hell broke loose in Gondar. The emperor took a small army and rode from Debre to Gondar, where rebels had recently taken over the city. The rebels, having heard about his approach, left the city and hid in the outskirts. The emperor believed that the townfolk and the clergymen had collaborated with the rebels. Zena and Nuguse watched with horror as the emperor ordered his army to ransack and then burn their beloved city, including the churches in it. He ruthlessly commanded women whose husbands he suspected of rebelling to be thrown into the fire. Zena and Nuguse's family were ordered to move to the emperor's mountain fortress at Magdala. They wept secretly for the destruction of Gondar, the country's greatest city. They also wept for the sad decline of their emperor. Everything of high value to the emperor was placed in the fortress, from his beloved wife to looted treasures and important prisoners, including European missionaries and diplomats, who were held hostage as ransom for getting Western artillery. Zena found life in Magdala hard. Living so close to many captives made her contemplate the value of freedom. With the recent rumors of the British forces coming to liberate their citizens, she started to question if fate will flip its side and if she and her people would end up being captives by foreign forces. Emperor Tewodros, fearing the same fate, allowed civilian residents of Magdala to go back to Gondar. Zena and her family were so relieved, but realizing that the case was different for Faiza, who was not to taste the delicately sweet taste of freedom, she implored her father to allow him to go back to his family in the south. "Very well then," Mikhail said. "Tomorrow, as we start our trip, I'll inquire about news of traders going to the south and interest Faiza in their care to accompany him to his village." 2 days later, when the returnees reached a small town, Mikhail arranged with traders to accompany Faiza as far south as they could. Faiza, who had assumed that he would never be able to see his family again, fell face down to the ground and wailed and kissed his master's feet. "What is this nonsense? Get up, Faiza," Mikhail ordered in a firm voice. "Aren't we all mere humans? I thought you knew better, Faiza. Prostrate to the merciful God in thanksgiving, not to us." Faiza had been baptized in Orthodox Church while living at Michael's house in Gondar. He further received instructions on the Bible under the Ferengi missionaries who were captive at Magdala. "Yes, my lord," he mumbled as he wiped his tears away, but as much as he tried to control himself, he couldn't stop trembling. "Aizo! Brace yourself, Faiza. We'll pray for your safe reunion with your family," Michael encouraged and handed him a sack full of presents. Faiza finally managed to steady his voice and blessed his master. "May the good Lord be kind to you as you have been kind to me. May he bless you with health and many more children. May the Lord who abundantly gave you love, kindness, and fortitude be glorified. May he continue to bless your children and their children." His voice faltered as he hiccupped to hold in another wail. On the 3rd day of the journey to the south, Faiza learned that the traders could only accompany him as far as Gamagofa. From there, it was a 2 days' journey to his village. As he remembered the forest that's called the Valley of Death, he thought the infamous witch doctors and the Tsar that lived in there. Thinking of crossing the valley on his own made his heart quiver with fear. He recalled Mamete back in Gondar, whom the Tsar possessed and took her life at the young age of 20. As Faiza and the caravan of traders were crossing the Abai River, he sighed and softly prayed, "Heavenly Father, please protect me from all evil, that of man and spirit. Please, merciful God, help me to get to my earthly father's house safely." Just then, an incredible peace descended on him. He knew then, beyond any doubt, that he would be reunited with his family and live a long life as a free man. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to listen to more stories as soon as they are released, please subscribe to this channel. We would like to encourage those who are artistically inclined to send us drawings or pictures that came to your mind while listening to this story. Send us a line describing the image on journeytoethiopia4@gmail.com. Until the next story, goodbye.